Let me ask you something uncomfortable. What if the thing holding you back isn't laziness, personality, or just the way you are, but something your brain has been quietly doing for years without you realizing it? Here's a number that should stop you cold. Researchers estimate that roughly 300 million people worldwide live with depression, but that figure almost certainly undercounts the real total because the most common form of depression doesn't look like depression at all. It doesn't look like someone who can't get out of bed. It doesn't look like visible suffering. It looks like a normal Tuesday. It looks like your routine. It might look exactly like your life right now. So there's a clinical condition called dysthymia, also known as persistent depressive disorder or chronic low-grade depression. And it is one of the most underdiagnosed mental health conditions in the world. Not because it's rare, but because it's invisible. It disguises itself as personality. It masquerades as routine. It tells you, this is just who I am. And millions of people spend years, sometimes entire decades, functioning on top of it without ever knowing it's there. Today, we're going to look at 10 habits that seem completely ordinary that you might have done this morning, that you might be doing right now, and that psychology identifies as clear signals that something deeper is going on. One important note before we begin. This is not a diagnosis. Yet nothing in this video replaces the assessment of a qualified mental health professional. But you cannot get help for something you haven't recognized yet. And recognition always comes first. That's why you're here. Let's go through them one by one. Habit 1. Chronic procrastination. This is the one everyone normalizes fastest. I've always been like this. I work better under pressure. I just need the right motivation. But psychology has a very specific explanation for chronic procrastination, and it has nothing to do with laziness or discipline. When the brain is operating under chronic depression, it runs a constant unconscious cost-benefit analysis on every task. And the result is almost always the same. The anticipated effort feels insurmountable compared to the expected reward, so the brain doesn't fail to act because it's weak. It avoids because it's protecting itself from what it perceives as unbearable exertion. This is called emotional avoidance behavior, and it's one of the most well-documented behavioral signatures of depressive states. The person isn't choosing not to act. Their nervous system is doing them what it believes is a favor. The cruel irony is that avoidance makes it worse. Every task avoided reinforces the brain's belief that tasks are overwhelming. The pile grows, the guilt compounds, and eventually the habit becomes indistinguishable from personality. If you've told yourself, I'm just a procrastinator for years, it's worth asking, is that who you are, or is that what your brain has been doing to cope? Habit 2. Sleeping too much or not enough. Both ends of this spectrum matter equally, and both are commonly explained away. You can't fall asleep even when you're completely exhausted, lying awake while your mind runs on a loop. Or you can sleep 10, 11, 12 hours and wake up feeling like you haven't slept at all. Neither of these is simply a sleep preference or a consequence of a busy schedule. Chronic depression directly disrupts the circadian rhythm. Serotonin, the neurotransmitter most associated with mood regulation, also plays a critical role in governing the sleep-wake cycle. When serotonin levels are chronically dysregulated, the body loses its natural sleep architecture. Cortisol patterns shift. The brain can't properly signal when to wind down or when to wake up. The most common explanation people give: I'm a night owl. I've always been like this. It's stress from work. And any one of those might be partially true. Sir, but if your relationship with sleep has been fundamentally broken for years, if rest never actually restores you, that pattern deserves serious attention, not just another sleep tip from the internet. Habit 3. Emotional eating or complete loss of appetite. You eat when you're bored. You eat when you're anxious. You eat when there's nothing wrong at all, just a restless pull toward the fridge. Or the opposite. You forget to eat entirely, and hunger feels like a signal your body stops sending. Both of these patterns have the same neurological explanation: dopamine dysregulation. Dopamine is most commonly described as the pleasure chemical, but that's an oversimplification. Dopamine is really the anticipation and motivation chemical. It drives you toward things your brain has learned to associate with reward. And critically, odds it also regulates appetite. In chronic depression, dopamine levels fluctuate irregularly. The brain either seeks food as a reliable, fast source of dopamine stimulation, especially high sugar, high fat foods that produce a quick neurochemical hit, or the system becomes so depressed that appetite signals fade almost entirely. This isn't weakness. This isn't a character flaw. It's your brain's reward system running on a broken circuit. Understanding that is the first step toward addressing it. Habit 4, social withdrawal. With a reasonable excuse. This one is the hardest to catch because there is always a valid explanation available. I'm tired. Work has been intense. I'm introverted, and social situations drain me. I just need some alone time. And the deeply uncomfortable truth is, all of that might be genuinely true. That healthy introverts exist. Healthy people need solitude. The question isn't whether you occasionally want to be alone. The question is, what happens when you consider being with people? Psychology distinguishes between two very different experiences that look identical from the outside. The first is chosen solitude, time alone that genuinely restores you, that you enter freely and exit feeling better. The second is social withdrawal driven by emotional exhaustion, where the idea of seeing other people feels like preparing for a physical ordeal, where cancellations bring relief that feels disproportionate, where isolation has become default rather than deliberate. The depressed brain doesn't have the emotional resources to manage social interaction, so it retreats. And every time it retreats, do the neural pathways that make connection feel manageable get a little weaker? The isolation self-reinforces. Ask yourself honestly, when a plan gets canceled, do you feel relief? And when you feel that relief, does it feel earned or does it feel like an escape? Habit 5, irritability over small things. Most people don't associate this one with depression at all, which is exactly why it goes unrecognized for so long. Depression is not always sadness. In a significant number of people, particularly men, though not exclusively, chronic depression presents primarily as irritability, a low, constant simmer of frustration. Everything feels like friction. The traffic, a tone of voice, background noise, someone typing too loudly. The threshold for annoyance drops so low that you begin to feel like the world is conspiring to grate on you. And this happens because chronic depression puts the autonomic nervous system into a persistent low-level stress state. The brain's regulatory resources, the ones that would normally allow you to absorb minor frustrations without reaction, are depleted. There's nothing left for tolerance. The part that makes this particularly damaging is the guilt that follows. I'm too sensitive. I have a bad temper. I'm difficult to be around. People internalize the irritability as personality rather than recognizing it as a symptom of a nervous system running on empty. Your nervous system doesn't have a bad character. It's overloaded, and overloaded systems can be restored. Habit 6, compulsive content consumption, endless scrolling, 4-hour series binges, one YouTube video after another. Yes, including this one. And I mean that seriously. A compulsive content consumption is one of the most modern forms of a very old coping mechanism, cognitive avoidance. When the brain cannot tolerate being alone with its own thoughts, when stillness feels threatening rather than restful, It seeks constant external stimulation, not for enjoyment, for sedation. Psychologists call this digital anesthesia. It's not engagement, it's numbing. The difference is subtle but detectable. Genuine enjoyment leaves you feeling satisfied. Compulsive consumption leaves you feeling empty. You reach the end of a series or a 2-hour scroll session, and instead of feeling rested or entertained, you feel vaguely hollow, like time passed without you actually being in it. If you've experienced that hollow feeling and immediately reached for the next video, the next episode, or the next distraction, you weren't lazy or undisciplined. You were running from something your brain wasn't ready to sit with. Habit 7. Nothing excites you. The way it used to this is the one that surprises people most. This is the one most often misidentified as maturity. The clinical term is anhedonia, and it is one of the most diagnostically significant symptoms of chronic depression. It's not sadness, it's not unhappiness, it's an absence, a flatness where feeling used to be. The music you love sounds fine now, but it doesn't move you. The hobby that used to make you lose track of time sits there, available, and you feel nothing toward it. The anticipation you used to feel before a trip, a project, a weekend plan, that forward-leaning excitement is gone. Things happen, but they don't land. Add to the most common refrain people use for this: I've just grown up. I'm not as intense as I used to be. I'm more realistic now. But here's what's actually happening biologically. The brain's ability to anticipate reward is impaired. Dopamine signaling, which creates the feeling of looking forward to something, is disrupted. You can still function. You can still experience events, but the color is gone from them. This is a clinical alarm signal, not aging, not maturity, a signal. Take a moment right now and think of something you used to love, genuinely love, the kind of thing that lit you up, and notice what you feel when you think about it today. We're going to come back to that at the end. Habit 8, constant negative self-talk. I'm such a mess. I can't do anything right. Why does everything take me so much longer than other people? I'm not good enough for this. How many times a day do thoughts like these move through your mind? And how many times do you let them pass without questioning them because they feel true? The depressed brain has a profoundly distorted self-perception filter. Psychologists call it negative cognitive bias, the consistent tendency to amplify failures, minimize successes, and construct a narrative of personal inadequacy that feels completely objective and accurate. The most dangerous aspect of this isn't the thoughts themselves. It's what happens over time. That inner critical voice stops feeling like a voice and starts feeling like reality. You don't think I'm being too hard on myself. You think I'm accurately assessing myself. The distortion becomes the lens through which every experience is interpreted. Then, if you've been living with a relentlessly self-critical internal narrator for years and assume that's just how honest people think about themselves, it isn't. That voice is a symptom, and symptoms can be treated. Habit 9, difficulty making simple decisions. What do you want to eat? What should you wear? Should you reply to that message now or later? If questions like these generate a level of mental exhaustion that feels completely disproportionate to the decision involved, you're not being dramatic. You're experiencing something with a clear neurological explanation. Chronic depression impairs prefrontal cortex function, the region of the brain responsible for executive function, planning, and decision-making. When the prefrontal cortex is operating under chronic stress and depleted neurotransmitter levels, even small decisions become cognitively expensive. The mental processing required for "what should I eat" feels the same as it would to a healthy brain deciding on a major life choice. The behavioral consequences are significant. People start delegating all decisions to others, defaulting to the same choices repeatedly, or simply making no decision at all and letting circumstances decide for them. Over time, this erodes the felt sense of agency over your own life, which deepens the depression. Another self-reinforcing loop. Habit 10. Living in permanent survival mode. This is the most pervasive one and possibly the most painful. It's not a crisis. There's no specific thing wrong. You're not falling apart. You're just getting through Monday to Friday, waiting for the weekend, weekend to Monday with no particular sense of direction. You're fulfilling obligations, maintaining the surface, doing what needs to be done, but without any felt sense that life is moving towards something, without that undercurrent of aliveness that used to be there. Psychologists describe this state as adaptive functioning with hedonic deficit, which in plain language means you're functioning well enough for no one to notice, including yourself, but you're not actually living. You've optimized for survival and lost access to flourishing. This is perhaps the cruelest design of chronic depression. It allows you to be functional enough that you never hit a visible bottom. You never have the crisis that forces you to seek help. You just quietly carry it year after year, calling it personality, calling it the way life is, calling it being an adult. Well, what to do with this? Go back to what I asked you a few minutes ago. That thing you used to love, that thing that used to light you up. Is it still there when you reach for it? If the answer is no, or even a hesitant, uncertain, not really, I want you to hear this clearly. That is not you becoming more realistic. That is not what growing up feels like. That is a signal from your emotional system that has been waiting for you to pay attention. The genuinely good news, and this matters, is that chronic depression responds to treatment. Cognitive behavioral therapy has decades of strong clinical evidence behind it. Guided lifestyle interventions, sleep, movement, nutrition, social connection, produce measurable neurological change. In some cases, medical support accelerates recovery significantly. The brain is not fixed. It is plastic. It can be retrained. But all of it starts with recognition. And recognition starts with moments exactly like this one. If anything in this video landed for you, not just intellectually, but somewhere deeper, please don't let that feeling pass without acting on it. Write it down. Talk to someone you trust. Consider reaching out to a mental health professional, even just for an initial conversation. You don't need to be in crisis to deserve support. And if you know someone who has been quietly struggling, someone who seems fine on the surface but not quite like themselves, share this with them. Sometimes a person cannot see this in themselves, but they can see it in something a person who cares about them sent their way. You made it to the end of this. That already tells you something about yourself.